This week, we'll be exploring unsolved mysteries that range from one of the greatest, most fascinating prison breaks ever, to the creepy, devil-like creature spotted in New Jersey and Philadelphia. We will explore all of these and more today, so grab a drink. My choice today is honey and lemon tea with ginger and cardamom. And join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. But really quick guys, I would just like to thank my Patreon supporters, Kelly Scott, Paper Shades, Ash M, Foxy Nico, and Stacy Stark. If you would like to support this channel and see these videos a few days early, there are links to the Ko-fi and Patreon in the description below. But now, let's get into the video. Jennifer Mary Beard was a 25-year-old school teacher who went missing in 1969. She was from New Zealand, and Jennifer just loved to hike. Like, she couldn't get enough of it. So her and her fiance had just recently arranged a hiking holiday where they would each travel separately around the South Island of New Zealand and then meet up together at the end just a few days later at a particular rendezvous point. But Jennifer never showed up. And when she wasn't there on the day that her fiance had arranged with her, he immediately reported her missing. So the only real clues for this one, and there weren't too many of them, was that Jennifer was last seen around 3 or 4 days before this in a greenish bluish car with an unidentified middle-aged man. And this was almost the extent of the clues that they had for her. There was no real other sightings after this, and there were no belongings found of Jennifer's, or obviously Jennifer herself. So there was a massive search undertaken in the immediate area as well as surrounding areas, looking for Jennifer or some of her clothes or shoes or her backpack or anything they could find to give them more clues as to where Jennifer might be. And this was a really tough search, as a lot of the area in that area was mountainous, hilly, swampy, not great terrain for a search, but obviously great terrain if you are into hiking. And the search went on and on and on. Eventually, Jennifer was found around a week later, dead underneath a bridge. The river that was flowing over her had severely decomposed her body, which meant that a bunch of the clues that you would normally get from a body weren't really there with Jennifer, which made the case all that much harder. But her trousers were around her knees, and the clothes on her upper body were wrapped around her neck. So that gave investigators some clue as to what likely happened. She was likely underneath the bridge, relieving herself, when someone came by, either the man from the bluish greenish vehicle or someone else entirely, and in the moment attacked and killed Jennifer. Her backpack and camera, which may have provided some evidence as to who she was actually with at the time, were never found. And sadly, both the man and the bluish greenish car have never been identified. And interestingly, disturbingly enough, Jennifer's body was actually found 6 days before she was reported missing. She was reported missing on the 9th of January. But on the 3rd of January, there was a family actually driving down this very same road. The 8-year-old daughter of the family said she needed to go to the toilet, so they stopped the car. The 8-year-old girl went underneath the bridge to relieve herself. And when she came up, she told the parents that there was a woman down there that didn't have any clothes on, and the girl thought that she was sleeping. And the parents, I guess, didn't pay too much attention to this. I don't know if they thought she was lying or if it was just a homeless woman or drug addict that they didn't want to interact with, but they basically just ignored it and got back in the car and drove off. And I know Jennifer was already dead at the time, and she was eventually found, but it must be a wild thought to be going over in your head if you were the parents or if you were especially the 8-year-old girl. Jennifer Odom was a 12-year-old girl who was found killed just 10 miles from her home. She got off of the bus on the way home from school one day and went missing and wasn't seen after this until her body was sadly found. The trail for this case ended fairly quickly, as there really wasn't too much to go off, and partly because of this dead end, the detectives resorted to using the services of a psychic, Nancy Myers, to try and give them some clues or direction as to the nature of the killing or the killer or killers themselves. There were a bunch of backs and forths and dead ends in this case, until finally a man named Jeffrey Crum Sr., who was actually arrested and charged for many similar cases, and was actually already serving life in prison for these cases, was in 2023 charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault in Jennifer Odom's case. And if he is convicted of these charges, his sentence could be upgraded from life to death. So fingers crossed. The Jersey Devil is fucking terrifying. I mean, just look at it. It is often described as a bipedal, kangaroo or wyvern-like creature with hooves, horns, small arms, a forked tail, and bat-like wings. It moves around very quickly and is often described as having a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream, which is just fucking perfect. As if it wasn't terrifying enough to begin with. It's called the Jersey Devil because it lives in New Jersey and it resembles the devil, I guess. So, scary stuff. Lock your doors. Jerusalem Syndrome is the observed phenomenon where an otherwise perfectly healthy, mentally balanced person goes to Jerusalem and becomes delusional in some way. Whether it's thinking that the government or a secret group of people is lying to them and deluding them in some way, or stuff like them being God, or God speaking through them, or them being the Messiah, or Jesus, or some variation of that belief. And it's kind of an interesting thing to happen, as I guess the massive rush and influx of religious iconography, religious imagery, the religious environment of Jerusalem, and just even the historical significance of the area, for some people can bring rushing emotions that I guess completely flood their brain, and perhaps it's just so intense and euphoric that they can only conclude one thing from it, and that is, since they've never felt this rush before, that either the feeling or they must be supernatural. And if they're going to Jerusalem and they believe in God and religion, that is likely what they will default to. It is an interesting but kind of sad phenomenon at the same time, as when anyone loses their mind, whether they just forget who they are, or they think they're Julius Caesar or Jesus Christ, it is always a sad thing to see, at least for me. And I guess when these feelings become so immense that they can, in some cases, completely supersede logic. Joanna Lopez. So this missing persons case is very strange, as we only seem to have parts of the missing case. So while watching these old television programs, this missing person image was shown at the end of one of these shows. And this was in 1989 and 1991 on WMAQ, which is a television channel in Chicago. The telephone number on the poster isn't connected anymore, and online searches for Joanna Lopez, especially in Chicago, really don't turn up much evidence. She's not listed on any missing persons archive or on any missing kids archive, and she's not listed on something as large as the Charlie Project. So she's like a missing person. There have been efforts made by certain online communities, mostly Reddit, to try and identify, locate, find, and contact her. And although there were a few close calls with this contacting, they kind of fell through, and still to this day, Joanna Lopez has never been identified or found. The John Lawson house. So this is a house in New York that's said to be haunted by spirits and possessed mannequins. The house itself is believed to be the oldest in the entire district, and nobody really knows who exactly lives there, if anyone. But there are definitely 3 residents of the house, and these are the 3 mannequins that sit out on the porch and simply watch the world go by. Now, the strange and creepy thing about these mannequins is that they often change position, hairstyles, clothes, and nobody has ever been seen going onto the porch in order to move them around or change any of their looks. Clearly, they are possessed. I mean, clearly. There is absolutely zero doubt in my mind about that. If you are enjoying this video, be sure to tip the like button and the subscribe button and notification bell if you don't want to miss any future videos. There are some really cool ones coming out before the year ends, and you can always unsubscribe later if you really want. I mean, I will cry if you do, but you always have that choice. Let me know what you are drinking down in the comments below, and for now, let's get back to the video. John Wade Wagner was this man or boy who went missing in 1968 at the age of 16. There isn't much to go off on this case. John was last seen dropping off his younger brother at a school dance and then was never seen again after this. His truck, his coat, his keys, his gloves were all found left in an alleyway in town, and there were some rumors that John had actually gotten into a fight with one of the boys from school, had been hit, had fallen over, hit his head on something and died died and then was subsequently disposed of in some way. But this has never been confirmed, and still to this day, John Wagner remains a missing person. John Weeks was a man who went missing in 1997, and there's a lot of missing people's cases in this week's episode. Now, John worked for a man named Marvin Gabrion, who honestly looks like a serial killer, albeit from the 1950s, but still a serial killer. And I just noticed this, but doesn't he look a bit like an evil Walt Disney? Like Walt Disney's evil twin or something? Like, surely it can't just be me. Anyway, this Marvin man, Marvin Gabrion, was an absolute monster. He was convicted of kidnapping, assault, and multiple cases of battery and murder, and one of them involved him duct taping this woman's eyes and mouth. It was a woman named Rachel. He duct taped her eyes and mouth, chained her to a block of concrete, and dumped her in a nearby lake. She also had an infant daughter who was never found. So John Weeks, the guy who went missing, actually had known the murdered woman Rachel and had also worked for Marvin. John was also a little smitten on Rachel, as he had actually asked her out on a date a few weeks prior to this. Now, it's not thought that John had anything to do with Rachel's murder, but it is thought that Marvin had something to do with John's disappearance and potentially likely murder. But since John's body was never found, we can't really know that for sure. But thankfully, Marvin is doing life in prison, and they are pushing really hard for the death penalty. So again, with this one, fingers crossed. The June 1962 Alcatraz Escapes. And this case is absolutely awesome. So I'm sure everyone has heard of Alcatraz, and even of the Great Escape from here, thanks to the film Escape from Alcatraz. I've actually got a full feature-length video covering this escape being released soon enough, as when I did research into this escape, it just absolutely blew me away and fascinated me to no end. So I think you'll really like this one, especially if you're into stuff like heists and prison breaks. But as the name suggests, this takes us back to June 1962 on the island of Alcatraz in San Francisco. The three escapees, John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris, had been planning this escape for roughly 6 months, and their preparation was, to say the least, elaborate and extensive. They had made these paper mache heads of their own likeness and painted them with paint found in one of the workshops in prison, and actually used hair from the barbers to give it a very lifelike look. They got these fake heads, stuck them in their beds when they were escaping, and so because of this, the escape wasn't actually discovered until the following morning. The men used blades, spoons, and an improvised drill to widen the ventilation shaft in the back of their cells, and this led out into a disused and unmanned maintenance corridor that ran along the back of the cells. And when they weren't using the holes in the back of their cells that they had dug, they concealed them with cardboard painted the same color as the walls of the cells. So already this is pretty complicated and pretty impressive. And if anyone out there has seen the TV show Prison Break, I can actually see a ton of inspiration for the plot actually coming from this Alcatraz escape. So they would occasionally go out these back holes in their cells into the corridor and then climb up to the top unused cell block, and all the way up there they made like a makeshift workshop in which they built certain things that they needed for their escape. So some of the things that they built were life preservers, as Alcatraz is obviously an island, and so to escape from it they needed to somehow float across the water, and so they built these life preservers so they wouldn't drown. And they built them using 50 raincoats that they had acquired over the 6 months, as well as a few other materials. And they found the design for these life preservers in an issue one of them read of Popular Mechanics. They also made a 6 by 14 foot rubber raft that was hand-stitched all the way along and sealed with liquid plastic bought from the prison shop. The parts of the boat were then heated and sealed together using the heat from some of the steam pipes nearby. So that's basically all the prep done for the escape. So on the actual night of the escape, they propped up their paper mache heads, left the cell through the hole, carried all the stuff they needed, got up to the roof, and then scaled down a pipe on the outside of the prison prison. And they also picked the perfect area. There was like this small blind spot where the searchlight and the guard towers weren't able to see or didn't regularly check. So in the mask of darkness, after making it to the ground, they climbed up and over 2 12-foot tall barbed wire fences, then continued out to the shore, and then used a concertina, which is like this small air-based musical instrument, and they used that sort of as a pair of bellows to inflate the raft. And then they set out on their destination, not to the mainland, but to Angel Island, which is 2 miles north. And it should be noted that by the time the escapees made it to the shore, it was only around 10 p.m. that night. And partly because of the papier-mâché heads that they left, the escape wouldn't even be discovered until the following morning. So they had quite a few hours to make their crossing. And that was basically the end of it. The escapees were never found or seen from again, and the official theory is that they likely drowned in the waters making the crossing, but that has never really been confirmed because, as I said, the prisoners were never found. And so because of this, the fate of the 3 prisoners is still a complete mystery. I will be covering this case in much more detail a little later on, as it is a very, very fascinating, complex, and at least to me, interesting case. And these escapees were genuinely some clever clogs. The Klein brothers were 3 brothers, Danny, David, and Kenneth, who went missing in 1951 Minneapolis. They were only 4, 6, and 8 years old, and they left their home to go spend some time in the nearby Farview Park. The boys were seen leaving their home, running down the road, and sadly were never seen again. There was a search done with police dogs, and the trail led them to the Mississippi River, and then just ended. So because of this, the police ended the case 5 days later, seemingly content with the theory that the boys had simply gone to the river and drowned. But their bodies were never found, and the family, especially at the time, strongly disagreed with the police's conclusion that the 3 boys had drowned, and they thought that they perhaps could have been kidnapped or even worse. The family never gave up in their search for the boys, and when the parents died, the 4 remaining brothers picked up where they left off. Wait, they had 7 sons? And so the remaining brothers put up computer-aged photographs of the missing brothers and acquired the help and services of the FBI, of private investigators, and even of psychics to try and help them find their brothers, or at least figure out what actually happened. But to no avail. Chris Kramers and Lisanne Froon. So this case as a whole is really wild and tragic and sad and puzzling. These were 2 Dutch students who went missing while hiking on the El Pianista Trail in Panama in 2014. As I said, the girls were from the Netherlands and they had planned this 6-week vacation in Panama. They planned on traveling a bit, seeing the sights, helping the local people, and just getting a vibe and feel for another country and another culture. They were in Panama for 2 weeks out of the 6 before they arrived in Chiriquí, Panama, where they were to live with a local family for 1 month while helping out local children. And on the morning of April 1st, they went out for a walk, a hike around and near the forests that surrounded the Baru volcano. And after this, they were never seen alive again. There was a wide search of the entire forest and surrounding areas done by both Panamanian and Dutch officials and authorities, but the girls at the time were not found. The 2 girls had been keeping in contact with both of their families for the entire trip, text messaging them, calling them daily, but after they went missing, the calls and texts just completely stopped. And the search slowly, after a while, started winding down as just nothing was found. But 10 weeks later, a local woman found one of the girls' backpacks in the jungle. And inside the backpack was cash, 2 pairs of sunglasses, Froon's passport and camera, a water bottle, 2 bras, and the 2 girls' phones. But the bodies were nowhere to be seen. So naturally, the authorities took a look through the phones and through the camera, and what they found painted a dark picture. They were able to see that the 2 girls had tried dialing 112, which is the emergency number used in the European Union, and they had also tried dialing 911, which is the emergency number used in Panama. But none of these calls ever went through, as they didn't have enough reception where they were calling from. These calls were at around 5 p.m. on the day of their disappearance, which is around 6 hours after they had left on their hike. And 3 days later, on April 4th, Froon's phone battery would die die. And between April 5th and April 11th, Kramer's phone would be intermittently turned on, seemingly to check for signal, and then turned off. But in these 6 days, her PIN number was never entered correctly, meaning either the person turning on the phone didn't even enter the PIN number, or they did enter it, but they entered it in incorrectly. Maybe either because they forgot it, or the person using the phone never knew it to begin with. The camera contained photos from the 1st of April, showing some scenery, their initial hike route, just basic kind of holiday photos. And then there was nothing until the 8th of April, when around 90 flash photographs were taken, deep in the jungle, in almost complete darkness. These photos showed a backpack strap, a mirror, some plastic bags on top of a rock, and the back of Kramer's head, as well as many other things. Months later, the remains of the girls were eventually found, just a few kilometers from where they found the backpack. They discovered a pelvis bone, a boot with a foot inside of it, as well as up to 33 bones and bone fragments scattered around the area. A pretty tragic case, but it was initially not handled very well by the Panamanian authorities, which led to theories and suspicions of the 2 girls being victims of a local murderer, which I think is maybe unlikely, but it is still possible. It seems, at least to me, that the pair sadly either got injured and or lost in the jungle, couldn't make their way back to where they came from, couldn't make their way to safety or to help of any kind, and without any reception to actually call for help, they just never made it out. They honestly seemed like great, adventurous, kind people, and so rest in peace, Chris and Lisanne. Christine Smart was a 19-year-old college girl who went missing in 1996, California. She had been at a birthday party at around 2 a.m. at a frat house, and she was found passed out on a neighbor's lawn, which I guess is the natural state for college kids apparently. And the 2 students who found her, Cheryl and Tim, helped Christine to her feet and went to walk her back to her dorm, when another student, Paul Flores, rushed out of the party and offered to help walk her back as well. So the group went back, Christine staggering the whole way, and one by one on this little journey, the students each went their separate ways, back off to their own dorms. Tim left first, then Paul convinced Cheryl that he would take Christine back to her dorm, as it was right next to his, so he could make the trip on his own. Cheryl apparently was happy with this, she went back to her dorm, and apparently, according to Paul, he took Christine as far back as his dorm. Then he let her walk the rest of the way back to hers, while he went inside and went to sleep. But after this, Christine was never seen again. She did not have any cards or cash on her at the time of her disappearance, and there has since been legislation actually brought into effect that says that all public colleges must immediately report any missing students to the local authorities, as this college at the time was completely slammed for not reporting Christine's disappearance, waiting an entire week before reporting it to the local authorities. They said that they thought Christine had taken a random unannounced holiday, apparently in the middle of the night with no cash and no card. Like, come on. And not much happened in this case for quite a few years. But the case continued, and bit by bit it was built up. Evidence was gathered, theories were crafted, an earring belonging to Christine here, some cadaver dog trails and potential grave sites there, and this was all focused around Paul Flores. They did ground penetrating radar on Paul Flores' father's home and showed that he once had something or someone buried beneath his decking. And a search of Paul Flores' home in 2020 found, amongst other things, certain pills that some certain people put into other people's drinks at parties and at bars, if you know what I'm talking about, and homemade videos showing Paul aggressively fornicating, shall we say, with potentially unconscious women. And so, after all this, as well as the evidence gathered over the years, he was actually charged and convicted of Christine's murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and his father, who was originally charged of accessory after the fact, was eventually acquitted of this, which is a great outcome to see Paul Flores actually convicted for this, but sadly, still to this day, Christine's body has never been found. Leah Roberts was a troubled girl who went missing in 2000 Washington. Her parents had both died in recent years, which apparently left Leah feeling lost both spiritually and mentally. And so, I guess she was just trying to find herself. She dropped out of uni only 6 months before graduating and spent a lot of her time in a local coffee shop, writing poetry in her journal. She would eventually go on this spiritual adventure of kinds, and one of the notes that she wrote for her roommate just before she left suggested that she had taken inspiration from Jack Kerouac, who was a writer who wrote books like On the Road and Dharma Bums, which are great books if you've never heard of them or read them, but they basically explore being an old school bum, living on the road, living from town to town, doing a lot of traveling, a lot of hitchhiking. It was seen as like the ultimate freedom back in the day, and it's kind of fallen off in popularity these days. But the books and writing emit this kind of sense of freedom and adventure and I guess lack of responsibilities in a way, and this is something that apparently appealed to Leah quite well. And the Dharma Bums, which is one of the books that she was reading, had actually scenes set in Desolation Peak, which is nearby where her car was eventually found. Her car was found crashed apparently in a complete wreck with a bunch of her belongings still in the car, but Leah was nowhere to be found. Before she left, along with the note, she actually left enough expenses for her housemates to cover her bills for around about a month, which indicates potentially that she was only looking to be away for a month. Now, interestingly enough, the detectives eventually figured out that no one was in the car when it crashed, and that the car had actually been tampered with to allow it to accelerate without having to push down on the pedal, as well as a few other pieces of evidence. This meant that no one was in the car when it crashed, and that the crash was likely just staged. Now, whether this was staged by Leah, or whether it was something more sinister, someone had taken Leah and then staged the crash, we don't exactly know. But in her final note, Leah said that she wasn't, you know, the S word, that she would never do anything to herself, but in fact that it was quite the opposite. The reason for this trip was her immense thirst for adventure and her love of life, wanting to experience it in the most open, honest, and free way possible. And that was basically it. There were some potential sightings of Leah after the car crash, but they were never really confirmed. And so, where Leah is, nobody knows. But she seemed like a really groovy, cool, creative, adventurous person who went through a hell of a lot in her life. And so, wherever she is, I genuinely hope she is happy. The Lost Mario Screamer. So this was this old internet video that was made in Windows Movie Maker 2, so that should give you some clue as to the age and quality of it. It featured a tutorial on how to unlock Luigi, and was named Super Mario 64 Big Star Secret. The video would take you through these steps that you needed to complete: kick a boo, run around the fountain X amount of times, tap A against this wall, etc. And the video ended, as it was a screamer, with a jump scare of the zombie from the K-Fee coffee commercial, which I think was a quite popular jump scare in those days. I won't scare you with it, as it would ruin the ambiance of this video, but take my word for it, it was pretty scary. But this screamer, which was quite popular on YouTube, has since for some reason been taken down, and the video is seemingly, aside from these random screenshots, completely lost. And that is all we have time for. I hope you enjoyed this video. We have some great icebergs coming up in the coming weeks. Stay safe, stay warm, and as always, thanks for watching.